You come from a musical family.
Yes.
And your mother, Bella, was an opera singer and started an art school. What was it like for you growing up in such a family and deciding that you were going to make a musical career? Was there a lot of pressure?
No, there was not a lot of pressure. I think for my mom, it was just kind of a natural progression of life that we would all take music lessons. So what happened was we lived in this suburb, the South Shore of Montreal, Brossard, and there was not a lot going on culturally. So she found a piano teacher who was willing to come to our house and teach the five of us piano. And this was, of course, great for my mom and very easy. And I think it was when I was about 8 years old that she decided to start the Préville Fine Arts Center. And so she basically said to the five of us, okay, I'm starting this thing, and each one of you choose an instrument. So because, so my eldest sister continued in piano, Melissa. Ruth decided to play guitar. Virginia decided to play mandolin, believe it or not. And I, for some reason, said violin. I'm not sure if I had something in the back of my mind that said, this is absolutely a passion. I need to play this instrument. I think it was just, I like the sound of it. Why not try it? So we basically didn't have a choice. We each had to choose something. My little brother, I think, chose the clarinet, if I'm not mistaken. And so it was just kind of a natural progression. And then I started playing, and I think I was a bit natural. I had natural tendencies to be good at this instrument. And, slowly as the years went by, I kind of fell in love with it. And then by the age of 12, I had a couple of different teachers from the age of 8 to 12. But then my mother hired this violin teacher straight from Russia. Okay. And in the violin tradition, Russian teachers have a very particular way of teaching. There's a very long tradition of virtuoso classical violinists. Mm-hmm. And he had taught at the Moscow Conservatory. He had taken lessons with the very famous David Oistrakh, who is one of the world's greatest violinists. And he ended up in Montreal, and my mom gave him a job. So I was actually one of his first students.
Wow,
and
wonderful.
This guy, Mr. Racha Sivajan, basically taught me how to become a professional violinist and was so rigorous in the training because you had to be. Otherwise, you don't make it to the professional level with the violin. So you basically have to practice 4 to 6 to 8 hours a day. And he was such an inspiration at the same time, a kind of fear. There was this fear relationship. And I just say thanks to him. Thanks to him, I got to become a professional violinist.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. When you speak that way, it reminds me, of course, the very obvious thing that music is a discipline, a way of life, but it's a discipline. So it's a very specific way of living. It's completely, focused and changes you, that kind of thing. So it's what happens is that precise way of learning about the world. Yeah. The word itself, when you look at discipline, is also connected, believe it or not, to the word for mortification, which was a kind of conscious way of training the body so that it would become an instrument for spiritual things like that. Of course, everyone who's ever taken violin or piano will swear that it's a torture and so forth if they didn't take to it. Now, for you took to it.
Yeah, and I think if I had not had this teacher who knew what it took, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this guy knew what it took to become very good at this instrument. And violin no matter what anybody says, it's very particular. It's one of the most difficult instruments to play. So if you're going to do it, you do have to put in these 10,000 hours and more.
And that changes you, I guess, right?
It does change you. It does change you because, like it or not, you have to develop this focus, right? And this focus, masters in all different disciplines have it. Athletes have to figure out this focus. Anybody who does a craft or something that takes this kind of very special training has to develop this kind of focus, right? And you just have to zone in and get into it. Otherwise, you just don't have enough hours to train your body to do this very specific task. Because it's a very specific muscle memory, basically. You're training your muscles over and over again how to do this very particular work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, yeah.
And you can apply that to raising your own kids, right?
I guess in a way you can apply it to anything, right? It's just focus. I mean,
yes.
It takes a number of years and it takes a certain amount of hours. So of course, by the time I was in my 20s and really starting to be a professional musician, I don't think I would have wanted to shift that focus to becoming a mountain climber or something, or a physicist, right? But yeah, all these disciplines take this number of hours in a way of putting in the hard work.
Now you've worked as you played for orchestras with a number of different conductors like Simon Stretfield, Franz Paul Decker, Alexander Brock. Now each of them has had a slightly different way, perhaps, of communicating what they wanted from you expressively. What was that like? As you worked with them?
I think for me, orchestral playing it's a very special art form, right? People don't quite realize, and even people playing in the orchestra we don't quite know what's going on, right? There's this kind of communication with the conductor that is very, how can I say, you can't, it's very elusive. You can't really put your finger on what's going on. How does this guy moving his arms around communicate to this group of musicians what he wants, how he hears the music? So there are good conductors and there are bad conductors. There's a lot of bad conductors out there, and there are very few absolutely brilliant conductors. And I think it the minute you sit down in an orchestra and everybody just starts to play together and this sound happens and you say, oh my gosh, that's like magic. And how can it be that without saying a word, we all understand what to do together? So I know Franz Paul Decker, he was a crazy guy. I mean, he was a bit mean and was from kind of that old school of conducting. And I was very young when I played with him. I was in a kind of training orchestra, the Orchestre des Jeunes du Québec, which doesn't exist anymore. But he was a mean one, and he would pick people out and choose that one person, that one little girl sitting in the back, who was probably the most fearful one, and say, you stand up and you play your part in front of everybody. Wow. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. And I never got picked because I don't think I exuded that kind of vulnerability, because I was always a little bit sure of myself. So
that's great. Thank God.
Yeah. But I mean, this career has allowed me to work with some of the most brilliant, I've worked with Charles Dutoit. I've worked with, more recently, Pinchas Zuckerman, who was conducting the NAC orchestra. And, just some of these young, brilliant conductors who are coming up, this new generation. So it's a really exciting thing to work with other musicians in that way.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You've also been a solo second violinist, and I just wanted to ask a very simple question. That's aside from just the general principle of practice, 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 what other kind of preparation do you need in order to be ready for the performance?
You mean for any performance?
Yeah, for any performance as a solo second violinist.
Well, solo second violin, what that means is that in an orchestra, you have the leaders of sections. Okay.
Right.
So you have the concert master, who is the leader of the first violins, but also kind of leader of the whole string section.
Right.
Then you have principal second. I write solo second, but it's actually, I was principal of the second violin section.
Right.
So I'm part of the orchestra, but I'm also leading a section. So that's basically what that is. And I think just getting ready for a concert, you have to learn your notes. You have to learn your parts as best as you can. And just kind of go in with a mindset of let's work together and try and make this sound. Because, you know, with the restraints in budgets for a lot of orchestras over the years, the number of rehearsal hours has started to shrink and shrink and shrink.
Oh, no.
Because they just don't have the budgets to pay for many rehearsals. So as the years go by, you have to be ultra prepared. You have to be able to sit down and know your part as best you can, because they just need to put this concert together as quickly as they can.
Okay, you've also been a studio musician. And now, aside from the fact that you're not playing in front of an audience, what special things are there about being a studio musician that might make it a bit more challenging in its own way?
Well, it's funny. Studio recording is a completely different, it's almost a different art form from orchestral playing or chamber music or any of those things. Because studio, it's basically you're there to record. Like I do a lot of recording for pop musicians, like sound, you know, doing on pop music. But a lot of it is also film music, right?
Right.
So in a studio, basically the way you play is, you know, you've got a microphone right above you.
Right.
You just try and not make any other noise than what's coming out of your instrument. You don't play over the top like you would in an orchestra, right? Or solo. You have to just blend with everybody else as carefully as you can. And it's this special kind of sound that you need to produce, because you say, if you listen to a film soundtrack, for example, you don't hear any, you know, really everybody has to have this blend that is going to be on this soundtrack, that's going to be mixed in order to just be backup music for whatever the images are. So it's a different kind of playing, because in a concert hall, you need to push your sound out. You need to say, look, there's audience members that are in that last row there that have to hear this. So you play a little bit more aggressively. Whereas in studio, you've got a microphone right there that picks up every little sound. So it has to be kind of more careful, very blended playing.
Since you brought up pop music, you've played with, you know, a lot of big names like Barbra Streisand and George Benson and, you know, a number of different people. Do you have any stories about any of these people?
Well, I have a really funny story about, I always love this story. When I met the Queen of England, because I was hired with a quartet to play. She was here, I don't remember what year it was, but it was one of these royal visits. And there was this big supper where she was there with Prince Philip, and we were playing, the band was playing in the background, and there was a jazz band and a string quartet. That day, earlier in the day, there had been a big show outside, but the weather was horrible. We were on this outdoor stage, and there is this rain coming in, just coming in slantwise. Everything was getting wet. And so the violinists, of course, we have these instruments, you know, some of them are, you know, $60,000, $70,000, $800,000 instruments. So all the violins said, look, we can't play because we're going to get water on these instruments. No way. So the crew, the production crew said, okay, we're going to give you garbage bags. So just put the garbage bags over your violins and play. The logic
inside a garbage bag?
inside a garbage bag.
Oh,
Because the thing is, we weren't actually playing. All the music was pre-recorded.
oh, I
so
see.
we were just pretending to play. We were just lip syncing.
Okay. Inside garbage bag.
It must have looked so ridiculous. I don't even know what it looked like. And the Queen was sitting in this like kind of little area close to us. She was probably miserable, right? It was cold and rainy, and she had to sit through this whole concert ceremony in the wind and the rain. So anyway, later that evening, there was this big gala, and we were there. And after the show, they said, musicians, come with us, go line up. We were about 10 of us. And we got to meet the Queen, right? We got to say hello and curtsy, and it was quite special. And she stopped at us, the string players, because we had our violins, and she said, were you playing today with the garbage bags on your instrument? And she started laughing and laughing. And so it was kind of this joke. And we
made the Queen laugh.
We made the Queen laugh. We made the Queen laugh. And it was kind of this joke between us. And we were, so that was, and at the time I didn't think very much of it. But afterwards I said, wow, I just met the Queen of England. And that was definitely a highlight of my career.
Thank you. Yeah. What? Yeah. As a performer, what have been some of your favorite compositions to play?
Oh my goodness!
I know there are many, but
yeah, I think for me as a performer, I have to admit that one of the things I always say to my friends, one thing about all this work we put in, especially as string players, is we get to play chamber music. So one of my favorite things to do in life is play quartets. Because string quartets are some of, I believe, some of the most beautiful compositions that have ever been made. So Mozart string quartets, Beethoven string quartets, Schumann string quartet, Schubert, Death and the Maiden. I mean, to me, that's like the summum of composing for string instruments. It's some of the hardest. I think composers would always say it's really hard to do that, but if you can do it successfully, it is so, so beautiful. So I think if I could now, that's all I would do. It's just, and wonderful. A string quartet, you can just sit in your living room and we used to do that sometimes if we ever had time. We'd have reading parties. So we just basically get 4 of us together and say we had books of string quartets and say, let's just do sight reading and just play this beautiful music. We didn't need an audience. We just did it for our own pleasure.
That was my next question, actually, about your experience playing quartets, but you've already answered it. You played at one point with Angèle Dubos. And, so that was an ensemble appassionata, right? And right. Whether it's something you were going to return to something like that, but
I mean, Angèle Dubos, she was a special, she was a firecracker, that lady. I mean, she knew how to get things moving. And that was actually a very fun experience because first of all, it was an all-woman orchestra and there was no conductor. So we just basically played together as a chamber ensemble. And that was a really fun experience because we got to, do a lot of traveling. We got to play with a lot of different people. Actually, we got to play with Dave Brubeck.
Yeah.
We did Take 5 with Dave Brubeck at the Montreal Jazz Festival because of Angèle Dubos. And my husband was so jealous because my husband's a jazz musician. He says, how can you get to play with Dave Brubeck?
Right.
Well.
Just lucky, I guess. Yeah.
Just lucky.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So, coming full circle to some extent, your experience now, you're in these days, partly because of COVID, but also I'm sure because of your interest in music education, you're running Préville. And that's a special kind of place. It's not just, I was thinking about it, because it's not just for kids, it's for adults as well. Yeah. And when one thinks of the possibilities, one can go to McGill and do, conservatory education, but that's so rigorous and so forth, and it's only for the few. This is something, the Préville Academy, my understanding is, it just introduces you to the joy of the fine arts and the performing arts. What has been your experience with all that?
Well, it's funny because first of all, my mom started this, whatever, 50, almost 50 years ago. And her idea was this, like you say, a kind of democratization of, it's not for the elite, it's for everybody.
Right.
And her idea was have a whole bunch of classes that happen on a Saturday, open up the public schools because they belong to us anyway. They're paid for by our tax money.
Right.
So open them up on weekends so families can come in and offer such a variety of classes that there's going to be something for everybody. So dad would take a class, dad would take, I don't know, a judo class or a guitar class or something. Mom could take a sewing class if she wants. Kids could take a dance or judo or. So it was really to encourage the family to do artistic things together. And I think that over the years, that's what's made it. So Prayville has really been successful and has a different feeling. And what really warms my heart more than anything is that now that we're doing this again, or we're continuing this work, first of all, we have people who are now third generation who are coming and saying, oh, I was there when I was a kid and my mom did and now my kids and even sometimes my grandkids. Wow. So it's absolutely beautiful. And people will say it does feel like a family. So right. You say, welcome to our family. Mm-hmm. Come in, just take the classes you want. People come with a smile, they leave with a smile. Yeah. And it's just to say, the arts are such a huge part of our lives. Mm-hmm. Let's just open this up and, just get this. It's almost like a therapy for people now and always, but now more than ever. I think right. After COVID,
we need it now.
People's souls are just crying out for this thing. And I know it sounds kind of corny, but I think people are just so grateful to be able to have this experience.
Yeah, I don't think it's corny. You're also doing your best to grow a culture, a specific kind of culture, right? And exactly. It's just associated with Prayville, which is the Prayville culture, right?
And I always, it does amaze me that kids in this day and age with all the online stuff, the video games, the TV, the screens, they still love to play the violin. They still love to play the piano. They still love their dance classes. They love their theater classes. It's this way of expressing themselves that it just never goes out of style, no matter what we have going on around. Right. So it's a very enriching type of work for sure.
I want to talk also a little bit about the fact of your tango experience, because I think that's very cool. And I wanted to background a little bit because after Astor Piazzolla and the Kronos Quartet got together and played, it kind of opened it up for classical music to get to really notice it and so forth. And especially when Yo-Yo Ma and Rostropovich started playing tango, right? You say, whoa. What is this?
Wow, your musical
just
background.
For Argentina, right? It was spreading around. And then
you're right, though, Ramon. You're right that it was actually Astor Piazzolla who did that for tango music.
Right.
Because he bridged the gap between that kind of classical. I mean, he wrote the famous Four Seasons, right?
Right.
He did a version of Vivaldi's famous Four Seasons where he took little bits of Vivaldi's music and then he turned into this phenomenal tango kind of version of the Four Seasons.
Of course, tango purists will get nosebleeds when they hear this, right? But who cares, right?
Who cares?
Who cares? So I'm thinking, I hear it. I also hear, and I may be completely wrong about this, but I'm going to say it out anyway, is that I hear strains of things like klezmer music and rebetiko. And it reminds me, that not literally on the surface of it, but through the kind of music and what those different musical styles did to not just grow a sound, but to grow a community. And you had a specific, the musicians and the communities were had their own culture. It was amazing.
Absolutely.
And that culture obviously fitted in Buenos Aires. It seems to fit in New York, and it definitely seems to fit in Montreal.
Oh yeah.
And so
because it's a very passionate, right? I mean, Montreal has that Latin culture, right? Which is not everywhere in North America. So it has that kind of fiery, right? So people are drawn to it, and it just seems to resonate.
Also the Jewish element in it, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Well, you know that, I mean, I don't know what the history of it, so I might just be saying this. You probably know better than me.
Well,
but you know that there were a lot of Jews who emigrated to Argentina after the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't surprise me that because klezmer was Eastern European, right?
Absolutely,
it was basically from the Jewish, Eastern European communities. So I'm sure that mix. And in fact, it's actually funny you say that, because most of my years playing tango, I was working with an Argentinian pianist called Victor Simon. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if he had changed his name, but he was a phenomenally talented. He would not only play tango music, but he played a lot of Argentinian kind of folk, this very particular kind of folk music. But I believe actually Victor's roots are from the Jewish. I believe his family had emigrated there from someplace in Europe. So there's definitely a kind of crossover in that music.
Yeah. And once you hear it, if it's in your blood, you can't resist it, right?
But it's funny because I had no experience playing tango, right? Mm-hmm. And then I got hired by this guy, Victor, and, he would give me these parts of all these classic tango pieces, right? And they were crazy virtuosic for the violin. And I literally picked up these pieces and said, wow, I get this music. It came so naturally to me, and being able to be free and sliding around and kind of the schmaltzy. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because my parents came to hear me on one of my shows, one of these tango shows, and they said, oh my gosh, like that music suits you so well.
There you go.
So I think there must be something in the genes that it kind of just slipped in there and said, oh yeah, I get this,
Are you going to return to that once in a while, that kind of profession?
I don't know. Actually, Victor moved back to Argentina, so he doesn't live here anymore. And, if someone called me for that, I'm kind of playing less and less now, because I'm really doing a lot of work with Préville, and which is fine, because you know what, honestly, the body is starting to feel the years of wear and tear. I've been doing this for many, many years. I'm having some little pains in my hands that were never there before. And, it wears your body because you're using these very small muscles all the time. Yeah. So, I don't know if I would, there's a new generation of beautiful virtuoso violinists coming up. And so it's my turn soon to just step away and let these new young ones come. They're so good.
The other thing that occurs to me, because you were talking about all the owies, the aches and pains and so forth, it makes me think of that there's a long tradition. To some extent, it's mythical, but between music and healing, right? That music and healing have always been connected from time immemorial. And it's something that's very special. And that's interesting because, and one can see that, we can see, especially someone who has it in their soul to play that way, that you have this magical effect on the audience and you can heal their soul. I can see it. But what's also interesting is that doctors now have formed orchestras in Montreal.
Absolutely.
And that's fascinating because aside from sacred music and classical music, it runs counter to the notion that musicians are a debauched lot, right? That they just
absolutely.
They just wear dark glasses at midnight and constantly taking drugs, and they're just the opposite from healing traditions. But here, they get together in orchestras and they remind people, no, music is about healing.
Absolutely.
Have you ever felt that when you played?
Yeah. Well, I have this really interesting story, and this stuck with me over the years. I was at I've done a lot of shows, so, there are just certain ones that stick out. And we were playing the Rosamund Quartet, which is just this beautiful, moving piece of music. But it's in a major key, right? So it's not what you would traditionally think of as sad music, or
right.
It was this slow movement of the Rosamund Quartet. I would suggest anyone go and listen to this. And it was a fundraiser or something. So they were a young audience, a lot of kind of bankers and, money people in there who were just showing up because they were forced by their company to buy a ticket or something. And after we finished, this young guy, he must have been maybe in his early 30s. You could see he was someone who worked in business by the way he dressed. He came up to us and he had, you could see he had been crying, right? His eyes were bloodshot and he was all and he looked at us and he said, "Please tell me something. Was that music sad? Was that sad music?" Because it was like it had touched him in a way that he just didn't get. He had never felt that before. So he couldn't figure out why he was crying, right? Because he was saying, well, was that supposed to make me feel sad? Or, why is it having this effect on me?
That's a beautiful idea.
So I thought that is so interesting. I think people like us, I know, Ramon, you're an artist yourself, right? So we develop, I think we're some of the lucky ones in life, although it's not always easy to do what we do. But we develop a kind of sensitivity where our emotions are close. We kind of know what's going on inside. But you get the feeling that a lot of other people in life who work in different jobs or don't have that connection, right?
Yes.
So sometimes they feel it, they feel something, and it's like, whoa, what was that? Something goes right into your inner and moves you.
And how beautiful to be able, as a musician, to be able to share that with an audience, to know that you've enabled that to happen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to ask you, what musical experience, it doesn't have to be as a performer, but something to do with your work in music has been among your favorite experiences. Is there something does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, sure. Oh my gosh, there's so many amazing times. My husband is also just a brilliant musician. So, sometimes I would go hear him play and just open up to this whole jazz world. And
right. I've heard, by the way, that he's amazing. I've yet to hear him, but
he's phenomenal. And now my son is coming up as a incredible, rap kind of hip hop, beautiful musicians. But I think I've had so many beautiful times. When you do this professionally, especially I was a freelancer, right? So I didn't have one orchestra. I had certain groups that I was part of. But you just go to work, you do these gigs and concerts, but there are these moments, these very elusive moments when you can be playing and everything is just working. And this sound can happen and it just literally transports you somewhere else. I don't know where that place is, but you are somewhere else. You are part of this flow. I sometimes, I've been reading the Tao Te Ching, right? And they talk about, that's what it's all about, this kind of flow, the universe flowing together, these energies. And there are these very rare moments where you can tap into that and it is unlike anything else. So can I put my finger? I think there were just a few times when either playing with, a quartet or playing in an orchestra where that thing just happens. And it doesn't last long. It can last for, a few minutes, sometimes maybe a few seconds, but there's nothing more magical, nothing. And it can happen when you're listening too. It can happen when you're hearing something else or seeing something beautiful So
Great.
it's a very magical thing.
Thank you. So finally, I have one more question, although maybe you'll have questions of yourself. I don't know, but one more question. Thinking, your mother, Belva, would probably look at you with not just with love, but with a great deal of approval.
Wow.
Do you look at yourself? Does Veronica look at you with approval? And that's one question. And tied to that is, what else are you looking forward to in your life?
Oh boy, those are deep ones, Ramon.
Oh,
Those are hard ones.
I can't stop myself.
Those are because those go to a very tough place, right?
Yeah.
Because we tend to be very critical of ourselves. So actually, it's funny you bring that up, because I'm actually trying to work on myself a little bit to learn to appreciate myself and what I do, and getting the phrase, I am enough and I do enough, because we have a culture. I think it's in our family. I think it came a bit from my mom. My mom was an extraordinary woman, so driven, but there was kind of feeling like I'm never doing enough. I just have to do a bit more. So I'm really trying to practice in my life. I'm doing enough, and learn to appreciate myself. And you know what? I think taking over the Prevost Fine Arts Center was a huge change for me. It was basically a shift in career that I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And it was a huge learning curve of learning to administer a school, learning to have employees, but I'm so proud of where we're at. And, I have worked very hard, but I also have an absolutely extraordinary team. So that's really why. And I'm just so proud of where this whole organization is going. Through the worst time in our history, we went through the COVID period, which was terrible for art schools because we had to shut everything down. But we managed to take advantage of that situation and build these beautiful programs. And I just want to talk about one thing that a few things I'm so proud of, is that we're really working very hard now we've made these amazing connections in the Indigenous community. And we have these amazing programs now that are Indigenous arts. We are bringing into communities. So we have Indigenous bead weavers, we have Indigenous dancers, we have all these arts, and we're sharing them with the larger public and really introducing this culture into our culture. And it's such a beautiful culture.
Wonderful.
And now our newest thing is we have language classes. So right now we're offering Algonquin, we're offering Mohawk. Soon we're going to have Innu. And I think the arts are the way we talk about truth and reconciliation. I honestly, at the heart, believe that arts is one of the most profound ways of having this truth and reconciliation start. The exchange of artistic knowledge, the exchange of culture. If you teach me your language, oh my goodness, I'm going to understand so much more about you.
So it's not just Aboriginal people who take those courses. It's also the rest of us.
Not at all. Not at all. We've had these bead weaving courses with this phenomenal guy, Craig Commanda, who comes from Kitikan-Zibi, about an hour and a half outside of Ottawa. And he's been teaching traditional bead weaving. And he's an incredible artist, and people get addicted to it. And the funny thing is that some people take the class, and then after they go and they figure out, I think I do have like maybe an 8th Indigenous blood in me or something. And people just get addicted to these art, these classes. So it's saying these are fine arts. These people are incredible artists.
Yeah.
Let's just spread it around.
It reminds me, because I did bead weaving for a year or so for a while in the past too. So it's
so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So, and now we're introducing the languages, poetry. So it's just a beautiful way of reaching a lot of people. And
wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Veronica. This has been a great pleasure.
Oh,
And
my
we'll have to think of other ways in which we get to converse on Zoom sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Ramon. And you're wonderful. I mean, you're a great interviewer.
Oh,
My goodness, you did some homework and you did some research. It's great.
the least I can do.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. All right.
Okay.